Kakadosh Boker Tov, we're continuing with the halachot of whether it's going to be refuah or mericha and mareach. So now I was asked the question, a person has in their family cases, whether it's of different type of machalot, like for example on the skin, and what happens is that they wanted to find out if they're going to go to the park with their children, can they put on sunscreen, right? So, okay, let's try to analyze what is the halacha to do with sunscreen. So first of all, there's the concept of, we're going to say refuah, but is there a problem of refuah? At the end of the day, here, the sunscreen is not a cure, it's a preventative. And we already learned that anything which is a preventative is going to be permitted. Here also it's brought down in the halacha, he says, "Mutar limroch et hayadayim ot hasfatayim b'mishcha shenoed limnoa yovesh uladin et haor." The same halacha would apply to somebody who has dry skin, and they want to put on this cream. So he says they're allowed to put it because mitzad the refuah, there's no problem of refuah, right? He says, however, though, you have to make sure that it's going to be tivla kula begufo, that the entire thing has to be soaked into your skin. What does that mean? He says, or for example, the same thing would happen with shemen ozli or mishcha ozlit, where you don't have a problem of mimareach. He says that there's going to be like this. There's two different aspects of the question. We have a concept of mimareach, which is basically smoothing or spreading, and then you have a problem of refuah. If there's no problem of refuah, so for example, in the case that I told you, of the woman that she wants to put on sunscreen, that's not refuah, or even here that a person's putting on this cream in order that their hands are moist, that's not going to be refuah. So what's the other problem? Mimareach. So the Shitav Rav Ovadia Yosef is that there's no going to be mimareach if kulo nivla betoch haguf. Meaning that when you're putting the cream, if the cream is going to be completely absorbed inside of the skin, and you don't need that there's going to be a layer, which is an external layer on the outside, it's going to be permitted. And here he says, this is brought down, the Mekor is also Rosh Hashanah ben Orbach in the Shmirat Shabbat Kirchata, the Minchat Yitzchak, Rav Yitzchak Weiss, and also the Chazon Ovadia in Chelek Gimel. He says, Mekor Dvarim is based upon a Magen Avraham, that when he says that when you're going to be Meshafshef Rok al Gabe Karka, so for example, you have saliva which is in the ground, and you're going to start spreading it with your foot, right? It's called putting your foot in it. But he says there's no shayach isur of memareach. There's no isur of memareach. Derak shekavanato lemareach davar legabe chavero. But he says, what is memareach? When you want to put something on something else. So for example, sha'ava on chavit. You want to put the wax on top of the barrel in order to seal it off. Mashenkim berok, but to do with the rok, shirotze shibala kula bekulo bekarka, that you want that it should be completely absorbed in the ground, there's no problem. So therefore, the same halacha would apply, by the way, to a person that has a burn, or to a person that has any type of a ptsaim, any type of what it could be a bruise, it could be anything that it is. If it's going to be, so now there's more problems because of refuah. So the halacha is like this. If there's no problem of refuah, so then if it's going to be completely absorbed in the skin, it's permitted. If it's not absorbed in the skin, it's asur to put because it's mimareach. You could either have two choices. Either you put something which is 100% liquidy, because a liquid there's no problem of mimareach, or you could put the cream, but you have to dab. You're not allowed to smear. What does it mean to dab? It means you're just putting like this, but you're not actually rubbing it. Now the Or Letzion actually brings down this. He's talking about there a case of a baby that they have a rash and they're all red from the diapers or the nappies. So we have to remember that a child is always considered a choleh she'en bo sakana automatically. So therefore, by a choleh she'en bo sakana, it's permitted for them to put on a type of a cream for whatever, even if it has medicinal purposes. However, though, in such a case, again, you're not allowed to do memareach, you could only dab. So says the Or Letzion, even though you're going to put now on the baby this cream, and automatically by closing the diaper and later on it's going to be spread all over, but he says you didn't do the memareach. So therefore, even though it was going to be done on its own, you were not over on the isur, and therefore it's going to be permitted. So again, a very quick chazara. If there's no medicinal purposes whatsoever, which means there's no cure involved here, it's just to refrain from something happening, so there's no problem of refuah, only a problem of memareach. Two ways of getting out of it. Either it's a liquid, there's no problem, or it's going to be a cream, but it gets completely absorbed in the skin. For example, sunscreen, that usually when you spray it, and then it goes and you don't see anything anymore, but it completely gets absorbed inside of the skin. Or you're going to have, you dab and you don't smear. So that's going to be to do with anything which is to refrain from any type of a problem. If it does have curing properties, which means that it's there as a cure, it's an antibiotics, it's whatever it is that it's going to cure, so therefore there you do have a problem of refuah, and as we already said, if it's going to be a chole shebo, if it's not a chole shebo sakana, you're not allowed to because of refuah. If it is a chole shebo sakana, or a child that automatically is going to be a chole shebo sakana anyway, so then you're allowed to do this, right, again, but with the same properties that we spoke about to do with mimareach, which means if it's a liquid, no problem. If it's going to be a cream, so you either smear completely or you just dab, and even if it's going to be done on its own, there's no problem whatsoever.